Hello. It's really my pleasure to read a few poems for you today on World Poetry Day. And I thought what I would do is read a little group of poems taken from this book, Sonata Mulatica, it is called. And the reason why is because I think without having been on a Fulbright when I was very young, I don't think this book would ever have been written. Now, the book was written very recently, just published in 2009, I think, around there. But the experiences that I had when I was a young Fulbright scholar to Germany, to Tübingen, Germany, really informed the entire piece. I think the idea of being different, the idea of this other language made me experience that quality of being a foreigner in another land and reading yet all of these masterpieces that I had loved so much in my undergraduate career made a vital impression on me. But first of all, the story of this book. It is called Sonata Mulatica. That's a very odd title. It's taken actually from a term of endearment that Beethoven used for a young mixed race prodigy violinist who he had met in Vienna. This violinist's name was George Bridgetower, and he had come to Vienna to play for the maestro. Now Beethoven heard him, dropped everything, and began to compose a sonata for him. And that is the story that is told, the story of the violinist's life in this book. Let me read for you the very first poem in the book, which tells you actually the entire story. And then we'll get back to the stuff that goes behind the story. It's called The Bridge Tower, with a dedication from Ludwig van Beethoven in 1803, written in Italian, per il mulato Bridgetower, gran pazzo e compositore mulatico, which loosely translated, my Italian is not very good, but which loosely translated means for the mulatto Bridgetower, grand pal and composer, and mulatico composer, or mulatto composer. The Bridge Tower. If was at the beginning. If he had been older, if he hadn't been dark, brown eyes ablaze in that remarkable face, if he had not been so gifted, so young a genius with no time to grow up, if he hadn't grown up undistinguished to an obscure old age. If the piece had actually been, as Kreutzer exclaimed, unplayable, even after our man had played it and for years no one else was able to follow, so that the composer's fury would have raged for naught, and wagging tongues could keep alive the original dedication from the title page he shredded. Oh, if only Ludwig had been better looking or cleaner or a real aristocrat, Fawn instead of the unexceptional Fawn from some Dutch farmer. If his ears had not already begun to squeal and whistle, if he hadn't drunk his wine from lead cups, if he could have found true love. Then the story would have held. In 1803, George Polgrim Bridgetower, son of Friedrich Augustus, the African prince, and Maria Anna Sowinki of Biala in Poland, traveled from London to Vienna, where he met the great master, who would stop work on his third symphony to write a sonata for his new friend to premiere triumphantly on May 24th, whereupon the composer himself leapt up from the piano to embrace his lunatic mulatto. Who knows what would have followed? They might have palled around some, just a couple of wild and crazy guys strutting the town like rock stars, hitting the bars for a few beers, a few laughs, instead of falling out over a girl nobody remembers, nobody knows. Then this bright-skinned papa's boy could have sailed his 15-minute fame straight into the record books, where, instead of a Regina Carter or Aaron Dworkin or Boyd Tinsley sprinkled here and there, we would find rafts of black kids scratching out scales on their matchbox violins so that someday they might play the impossible. Beethoven Sonata Number 9 in A major, Opus 47, also known as the Bridge Tower. So that is the story. Bridge Tower drops out of history because he got in an argument with the great Ludwig van Beethoven. And what is so intriguing about this story, and what, having been to Germany and knowing German, helped me research in a way, was that you thought, well, what was the fury about? Bridge Tower says he said something about a girl. And I, in looking at this, fascinated by how that could have enraged the composer so much. I discovered, some of Beethoven's notes, his diaries, and in them there is, in very, very colloquial German, some little comments to Bridge Tower after they had met, saying, oh, let's go get a beer. And it's the quality of that language, the fact that it's not high German, but it's really just very, very casual German, shows me that they were friends for a brief and intense period of time during the writing and the playing of this sonata, which we know as the Kreutzer. So my research really began as curiosity. I was a poet. When I went to Germany, as a Fulbright scholar, I knew that I wanted to be a poet, but I didn't know what the world was going to do with me as a poet and whether they'd want me as a poet. That is some of the way in which this next poem came to be. I'm going to leap many, many years, and this is a poem where Bridge Tower, who is now in his 20s, the same age I was when I was just going off to a Fulbright, and he goes to Germany. I'm not going to tell you his entire story except to say that he was in England for during his formative years, playing at the court, and that he wanted to come back into the European continent, which he had left as a child, in order to visit his mother, but also in order to seek out this great man Beethoven. So when he comes back, he ends up joining up with his brother, who lived in Germany still with the mother, and they begin to play some concerts. His brother played cello. Now, as happenstance would have it, I also played the cello. I played the cello and the viola da gamba. Music is one of my passions, and so this story, in a certain way, was waiting for me to write it, I felt. But he joins up with his brother, and and in Dresden, they begin to play a few concerts before he goes on, builds up his nerve, and to meet Beethoven. This poem is called Floating Requiem, and in a way, it's a love poem to Dresden. It is a poem about the bleakness of German winters, and that quality of the continent that I had never experienced anything like until I had gone there as a student. Floating Requiem, Dresden, 1802 to 1803. Summer ended powerfully, as if God had snapped a branch from his mightiest oak and thundered, enough. The sky dimmed. Cloaks appeared. The Elbe's blue road turned wild and gray, struck by a grim fury. Everywhere one trudged, stone claimed dominion and set an implacable face to the centuries, only to culminate in this pleasing line of turrets and domes along the rapidly darkening riverfront. Wind fingered the crevices. Timbered walls stiffened as chill seeped up through our boots. Cathedrals thrilled to their tasks, spires bristling at twilight, and the doors cranked wide to spew out their gold. High in the organ loft we waited, my brother and I, skins burnished by candlelight, instruments gleaming. Watched them enter, the weary, the obedient, the curious, a ghostly scent of malted barley rising from their thick woolens and flaxen hair. They came for comfort, dragging the cold in behind them. They came for light, then closed their eyes the better to listen. Cello plowing low while I skimmed the thin ice above, teased the bright edges. All winter we played, and they lingered, through incense and gingerbread, from Advent to Christkindl to New Year's to Drei Könige, a salute to Balthasar, the dark king. And when the listening was finished, they stood up to gather their bundles. The last candle guttered, and we stepped out to a world rinsed of cares. A pale lemon light shone over the river. On the far shore I could see a faint radiance, a white path, snowbells budding, shouldering up through the muck for their first raw gulp of pure ether. And I knew it was time to take destiny further south. So that was Dresden, that moved from winter into spring. But what of Vienna, which was where Bridgetower was going next? He was going to go and meet Beethoven. This poem is a very short and kind of light-hearted view of the character that cities have, because I think each city has its own kind of character, and it's called Ach, Wien. The truly great cities are never self-conscious. They have their own music. They go about business. London surges, Rome bubbles, Paris promenades. Dresden stands rigid, gazes skyward, afraid. Vienna canters in a slowly tightening spiral. Golden facades line the avenues, ring after ring, tracing a curve as tender and maddening as a smile on the face of a beautiful rival. You can't escape it. Everywhere's a circle. Feel your knees bend and straighten as you focus each step. Hum along with it. Succumb to the sway. Enter the trance. Ah, sweet scandal. No one admits it, but we all know this dance. And so, as Bridgetower goes toward Vienna to enter that high court of scandal and rumor, Ludwig van Beethoven was just about to return to Vienna. He had been told that he was going deaf. And that, for a composer, is you feel it's like the kiss of death. What he did at this time was he was living in a little village outside of Vienna, Heiligenstadt, and he wrote a very famous testament, the Heiligenstadt Testament, in which he talks mostly to his brother about how he feels. This is one of the most intimate glimpses we get into Beethoven's mind at that time, as he makes the decision to return to Vienna and in a certain way changes the fate of music, but also specifically of this young violinist who was coming to meet him. So this is Beethoven speaking. Ludwig van Beethoven's return to Vienna. 3 miles from my adopted city lies a village where I came to peace. The world there was a calm place, even the great Danube no more than a pale ribbon tossed onto the landscape by a girl's careless hand. Into this stillness I had been ordered to recover. The hills were gold with late summer. My rooms were 2 plus a small kitchen situated upstairs in the back of a cottage at the end of the Herrengasse. From my window I could see onto the courtyard where a linden tree twined skyward. Leafy umbilicus canted toward light, warped in the very act of yearning. And I would feed on the sun as if that alone would dismantle the silence around me. At first, I raged. Then music raged in me, rising so swiftly I could not write quickly enough to ease the roiling. I would stop to light a lamp, and whatever I'd missed, larks flying to nest, church bells, the shepherd's home toward evening song, rushed in, and I would rage again. I am by nature a conflagration. I would rather leap than sit and be looked at. So when my proud city spread her gypsy skirts, I re-entered, burning toward her greater, constant light. Call me rough, ill-tempered, slovenly. I tell you, every tenderness I have ever known has been nothing but thwarted violence, an ache so permanent and deep, the lightest touch awakens it. It is impossible to care enough. I have returned with a second symphony and 15 piano variations, which I've named Prometheus, after the rogue Titan, the half-a-god who knew the worst sin is to take what cannot be given back. I smile and bow, and the world is loud. And though I dare not lean in to shout, "Can't you see that I'm deaf?" I also cannot stop listening. In that poem, I think I really, it felt for me to be a culmination of so many things that informed me as a poet, me as a person who also knew something about world cultures and was continually curious, and me as a musician. Because when I entered into my European adventure, thanks to the Fulbright, those many years ago, I was someone who was passionate about music, loved to play, did not know how music was going to fit into the life that I wanted to explore. I was passionate about poetry, and I was fascinated by the music that language makes and the music that each language makes. And the experience of being on that Fulbright helped me realize that you go into the adventure, you walk into that adventure, and the parts will find a way to fit. You make them your own. And so I truly, really do owe that to the Fulbright. Let me end with a very interesting poem, I think, because you may have noticed that there are no women in these poems. And that is a very strange thing. As someone who calls herself a proud feminist, to have written a book in which women do not matter. And yet that is the nature of this world in which these musicians were moving. Women were mostly peripheral. It ached me, it pained me that they were. And yet the course of this musician's life and the course of that sonata, which we know as now as the Kreutzer, was determined by a woman. It was the nameless, who knows, girl that Bridge Tower had made a saucy comment about, and to which Beethoven took offense, that changed that course of history. So I'm going to read one of the few poems in the book which is told from a woman's point of view. The woman is the countess, a countess for whom Beethoven, was famed for falling desperately in love. And this was the countess who then, for whom he wrote for Elise. It gives you a clue, I guess, I think, into the way in which she regarded Beethoven and the difference between her regard for him and what he imagined or hoped for. The Countess shares confidences over Carnival chocolate. He was a stormy pedagogue, always interrupting the prettiest airs, even his own compositions, which I was given to understand he did not permit everyone to play. I pounced upon each chord with the ignorant ardor of youth. I was 16 after all, and he was already famous in Vienna, where such approbations are stingily accorded. He insisted upon a light touch. He himself was a wild man, ripping the music from my stumbling fingers and stomping about as the pages fluttered sadly earthwards, like the poor pheasants dropped over the hunting fields of the Prater. Rest assured, I soon learned to play more lightly. He was pleased then, and a quick, soft smile would crimp that dismal chunk of a face, a sight just slightly less repugnant than his rages. He was exceedingly unlovely, yes, but with a threadbare elegance, much as a servant envisioning gentility might avail himself of the scraps and dashes from the milliner's basket. Sometimes I could coax him to the pianoforte, where he would bow his head, eyes closed, and wait, as if the silence spoke only to him, before playing without notes music of such inexpressible beauty. I thought to breathe and disturb the air would break his heart. He would not consent to payment, but accepted the linens I had sent up to his rooms. Poor man, he thought I had sewn them myself. Thank you.